Hey guys, Matthew, and this is going to be the second part of my reviewing or going over every single divination card video. So, I want to start off by saying a few things. First off, if you haven't seen the first part, it'd be pretty important that you watch that. There's a couple disclaimers and a lot of additional information in there. But just to try to speed things up in part 2 compared to part 1, all the things that essentially have the same ruling behind a certain decision or something I'll explain, I basically won't be repeating every single time. So that should save us a lot of time. So, for example, pretty much, rule number 1, gambling is pretty much always bad. All right, and rule number 2, if you don't know exactly what you're going to get, it's always pretty much bad. And if the outcome is corrupted when it shouldn't be, or like when you don't want it to be, it's pretty much always bad. All right, so those are the 3 things that should save us a lot of time. But anyways, let's get right back into it. So the way I'm doing this, I'm going over every single div card and giving my, basically giving some tips on from a flipping and trading perspective, what it's made for, and of course also from a just player's perspective. So let's get right into it. The Realm. Realm is actually a pretty decent divination card to flip in the first day or so, or half of the first day of a league, because a lot of people, especially in Softcore Trade League, are going, well, only in Softcore Trade League, I guess, are going to be getting Cast on Death Portal. It's almost mandatory for every build, and I highly recommend. It's one of the first expensive things you buy. Typically, Portal Gem goes for about 7 to 10 Chaos or whatnot with no quality. So if you can get this card for, let's just say, 1 Chaos, you're already making profit. And then if you get a Portal Gem that has some quality on it, you can sell it for even more, up to like 12, 15, 20 Chaos. So it can be a pretty decent card. That being said, it's extremely early and mostly for self-use. I have the Dragon, Corrupted, 10 cards, absolutely bad. The Blazing Fire, which is for 6 cards for a Chinsol. Unfortunately, Chinsol, the new version, and I say new, but it's been like 2 years since it's been nerfed and changed. Absolutely garbage. Nobody really uses it. Alright, Left to Fate, it's a 4-card set for a Corrupted Unidentified T16. It's one of these other cards, like I mentioned in the previous episode, that allow you to basically skip through the Atlas, if you will. So that's one that you actually want to keep in mind from a pusher's perspective. Alright, Charon Sword, which I believe is Onigoroshi, but 27 cards, absolutely not worth it. Typically, Onigoroshi is like an X or whatever at the start of a league. But 27 card, even if you get them for 1C each, it's just not so much that you won't make money, but it's the amount of time required, which is going to be insane to buy 27 cards. That being said, it is a pretty low-level card, and it drops pretty early. The Insatiable, Corrupted Harvest, that's bad. Obviously, Harvest being a weapon, if I remember correctly, and then Corrupted is no good. Yeah, the Harvest is the scythe or whatever you want to call it. All right, Obscured. Obscured is actually one that is pretty good, and you definitely want to keep it in your back pocket in leagues where breach stones are not really available or in high demand. For example, this league, we don't have breach on the map device, therefore there's a pretty limited availability of breach stones, and it was much more, that was the case, especially initially in the league, before people got to start farming them through different strategies like Lyra Arthane. Or if there's a ton of demand for a given breach stone, like last league, everybody was playing a Burning Arrow for their league starters, or I think it was last league. So the Xoph's Bow was actually worth a good amount, but also the Xoph's Blessing was worth a ton. So it's a very good idea to consider that. It's also a good idea to consider flipping the Obscured if you are in a duo party and the other person, your carry, is able to run these different breach stones, because a lot of the stuff from the breach swords is going to be worth quite a bit, especially mostly their amulets is what you're going to want to go for, and breach stones are also a great way to get XP, so it's a win-win. So this is definitely one that is pretty good. Alright, next we have Iron Bard. So Iron Bard is a 9 set of card, which is kind of annoying, but it does give you Trash to Treasure. Now, the 2 main uses for Trash to Treasure is to make influenced items that are unique. This is typically used for things like, for example, Mark of the Shaper, Mark of the Elder. The other ring needs to be of a given influence. If it needs to be unique, well, there you have it. Or the other reason why people use Trash to Treasure is to turn a regular 6-link base into a given unique. So, for example, a 6-link Occultist Vestment will turn into a 6-link Charon's Wrappings, which is really good. Alright, so this is why you would use Trash to Treasure. It's a very undersold divination card in a league start scenario, because nobody wants it, nobody cares, but in reality you can make a ton of profit. That being said, one thing to note is that when a unique has multiple different unique outcomes given its base, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get the one you want. For example, one of the main uses for Trash to Treasure in the past was for Call of the Brotherhood, but now that they've made a bunch of other 2-stone rings part of the core drop pool, it's no longer guaranteed. Alright, Forbidden Power, Bellfire, which is a garbage unique, and it's corrupted, so that's a no-go. The Breach, which is 4 cards for a Breach item. Now, the thing is, there's too many Breach items, which are overall bad, so gambling is no good. Dreamer, the Dreamer, 6 card for a Chila item. Again, you don't know what you're going to get, and most of the items from Chila are outright bad. What you really care about is the XP, and of course, the Blessing. Alright, World Eater. This one used to be really good, but unfortunately, Starforge has been nerfed significantly, and it gets beat by just about every rare weapon nowadays, but in a League Start scenario, it's still a very solid weapon. So, for example, if people are not yet farming Shaper, and you're able to make a set of, the World Eater for Starforge, well, you can make some pretty decent money there. So it's one that you do, in my opinion, want to keep an eye on very early. I'm talking the first few days of a league. Deceiver, 4 cards for Corrupted Bell Deceiver is garbage. Blessing of God, now I believe this was deactivated, so it no longer drops in the current league. But typically, the reason why people use this is to try to get good bases with the Elrion Jewelry mod, which is basically, I believe, up to -9 channeling mana cost, which is more so than 2 crafts from the bench of minus mana cost on your rings. So it's very, very good because it makes a lot of builds that require, constant mana usage from channeling, like Cyclone, for example, cost nothing. So it's really, really, really strong. And if you get, since it's item level 85, it's very endgame, and it can get any influence that you want afterwards through, obviously, the usage of, of the Conqueror's Exalt and stuff like that. So, yeah, this one is pretty good, but it's mostly from a crafting perspective than a trading perspective. Alright, the puzzle, 5 card for 5 splinters. That's awful, not worth the time. Which 1C unique for 8 cards, bad. Immortal Resolve, it's kind of the same thing I was mentioning earlier with Trash to Treasure, except this is for Fated Connections. And Fated Connections actually gives you a 6 link. Now, this is one that is rarely actually going to be worth using yourself. And what I mean by that is getting 6 of these cards, getting the Fated Connections, and then using the Fated Connection on a given item. Because the way that Fated Connection typically works is that's going to be overpriced because it allows you to skip over the RNG of trying to self-link an item, right? Instead of going through, potentially thousands of fusings, you can easily buy a Fated Connections, but typically you're going to be paying more for that. So there's going to be very little use case scenarios where using the Fated Connections is going to be profitable. That being said, typically the card is undersold in the League Start scenario and can be, if you can get 6 of them to create the Fated Connection, can be profitable. When I used to do this card a lot, I would aim for about 0.5 Exalt per Fated Connections created, so 0.5 Exalt per set of 6 cards, which is not too bad because there's only 6 cards and they're not that rare. Jeweler's Boon is kind of the same situation, but it's for a 5 link. Now, this one is quite the opposite. This one has a ton of use case scenarios where you can make money off of using the actual outcome, which is the Jeweler's Touch for the 5 link instead of the Fated Connections for the 6 link, because Jeweler's Touch is not particularly expensive, and there's a lot of meta uniques, thinking, for example, Shavs, or this league it was all about the Trapper Chest, that, when 5 linked, is going to both make them worth more, but also make them easier to sell. Not to mention, rolls on uniques typically matter a lot. So, it makes them easier to sell, but also make them worth more. So let's say you have a Shavs and you buy it that has like 145 ES and, 38, or is it 28? Lightning resistance, right? You are very close to a perfect Shavs. You're going to pay a little bit extra for that, but then you can slap a 5 link on it, and then you can sell it for even more than the extra that you paid for the rolls. So basically, it's compounding interest, if you will. Darkest Stream is Severed in Sleep, which is a garbage sword from Chiyula. Not good. The Master, Bisco Scholar. Unfortunately, Magic Find is no longer meta whatsoever, so this is kind of a skip. That being said, if Magic Find was ever to make a return, it would be something that you want to consider, but right now, it's not, and Bisco's has been nerfed by like 50%, so yeah. The Fathomless Death, 8 cards for Light Poacher, not good. Light Poacher is a helmet that drops from the Lich in the Abyssal Depths, no good. The Undaunted is, once again, we're talking about gambling. 5 cards for a Nemesis item. Corrupted could be a Headhunter, but it won't be, so it's a no-go for me. Admirer is a 9 card for a random Adziri item. It could be a Flask worth 2C. You have to remember that every single time someone sells a div card, it's very rarely going to be for less than a Chaos. Therefore, 9 Chaos for an Adziri's Flask, or even for the map, right? Adziri's map, or many for other uniques, it's just not worth it. Sorry about the dogs going off at it. Go ahead and close my door. All right. Next, we have the Sword King Salute for Duresso Salute, which is an amulet that used to be good back in the day, but it's no longer is, and 7 chaos, right? Get 1 chaos per card, not worth. All right, Army of Blood, same situation, 6 cards for 1C unique, not good. Celestial Stone is one that's actually quite good, both from a flipping perspective, but especially from a crafter's perspective. Because yes, it is a 10 card set, which is a bit annoying, and I believe this drops from Shaper himself or something. But the thing is, the Opal Ring is a very, very good ring, and it's item level 100, which means it can hit any mod in the game, and it is a Shaper item, which is really, really strong. So typically, this div card set here is actually going to be quite profitable, especially if you're doing it early, and especially if you're using this Opal Ring to actually craft it further. For example, you could get an Opal Ring like this, Shaper, item level 100, and get Assassin's Mark T1 on it, and then Awakener Orbic with any Elder Ring that has the Critical Strike Multiplier suffix. Those are 2 suffixes, and then you Awaken Orb them together, and then you can like craft life or whatever's missing on the ring and sell it for a pretty hefty profit, as it can be used for a multitude of builds, including especially builds that will use either Mark of the Shaper or Mark of the Elder, because any crit build will absolutely want, obviously, Assassin's Mark paired with Critical Strike Multiplier. So that's an option. All right, next we have Perfection, which is kind of the same thing, except you're getting a piece of jewelry, which means you don't know what you're going to get. It could be a belt, could be a ring, could be an amulet. The problem here is that if it's a ring or a belt, it could easily be bad bases, which would make them completely worthless. Because of that, I'm not a fan. Gambling, remember? But one thing to note is that if you do get an amulet of a bad base, for example, a Power Amulet for mana regen, you can actually use the Feather recipe of the amulet with 1 gem of each color, so a blue gem, green gem, and red gem. They don't have any requirements. They could be level 1 or whatever. Just buy them from a vendor, and you vendor that. It's going to give you back an Onyx amulet of the same item level and the same influence. So this is a very, very strong recipe. I believe it used to even uncorrupt items, but they did change that. All right, next we have a Porjo's Asylum for 8 cards, or Asylum for 8 cards. Not worth, remember, 1 chaos per card. Harmony of Souls. Now, the problem with this one is that it would sound like it's a pretty good deal. 9 Shrieking Essences for 9 cards, meaning that you're basically buying a Shrieking Essence random every time you buy a card. The only issue is that ever since the whole Atlas Maven stuff came out, there has been regions dedicated in the Atlas to farming essences that have drastically decreased the price and value of essences. Obviously, I'm talking about Heroic Hamlet here. So I would say it's a skip for me. All right, the Samurai's Eye, unlike what you might believe, where because it's a lower level Watcher's Eye, because obviously you can only turn it at level 80, it can actually be both 2-stat and 3-stat Watcher's Eyes that come from this. Now, I'm not 100% sure about that. You can definitely confirm and let me know in the comments, but I'm about 99% sure that you can get even a 3-stat Watcher's Eyes. So the thing about this is that it's very, very good to be putting some currency into this early, because while it's a gamble, and remember at the start of the video, I literally said gambling is bad, the difference here is that almost any Watcher's Eye in a League Start scenario is actually going to be worth a lot of currency, even with mediocre mods that are not like particularly great. And the reason for that is simple, because they don't exist, right? There is no supply. There's nobody who's actively farming things like Uber Elder at that point in a league in the very beginning. So there's a lot of potential to get even, it's very hard to lose money, I guess I should say, on the Samurai's Eye in a League Start scenario. And, of course, as the league goes on, it's going to become worse and worse, because people are going to be able to get their actual Watcher's Eyes from legitimate means, being Elder and Uber Elder. So the value of the mediocre ones is going to drop considerably. All right, Hailheart, it's kind of the same thing than the Perfection, but instead of being jewelry, it's just an item, and most of the time items are going to be bad bases, and the bases matter a lot when it comes to the value of a given influenced item. So it's gamble, it's a no for me. Mayor, again, 5 cards for Perendus Manor. Now it is 4 Watchstone count, which means T14 plus in whatever region that it is. Could be T14, 15, 16, or whatever. But again, unless you're desperately trying to get it for your Atlas, I would say that typically it's not going to be worth the time to mess around with this card. All right, Undisputed Merciless Val Axe, item level 100, Elder item. Technically, that could be a recipe for success, right? Merciless is T1% physical damage. It's great. Item level 100 is perfect, and Elder is also great for an axe. Now, the problem here is that one of the main ways to get very high physical damage weapons right now is to get a fractured suffix, things like attack speed, or a fractured hybrid physical damage, like, for example, let's just say dictators or emperors, and then using essences to spam essences until you get one thing that you're missing. So let's say you have fractured attack speed, you spam essences until, or flaring essences, or sorry, essences of contempt until you get flaring equivalent alongside a hybrid physical damage, and then you unveil for the percent physical damage, right? And this is giving you the percent off of the bat, which means it's limiting what you can do in terms of crafting with the options available. And right now, the meta option is obviously going to be unveiling for that percent, because you're almost guaranteed to get it. So again, not necessarily something I would pay too much attention to. The Rite of Elements, level 21 Golem Gems. Unfortunately, this league, or as of this league, Golementalist got absolutely shattered. It lost way too many things to be worth it, so it's a no for me. That being said, if Golem Gems or Golementalist was ever back in meta, it's one card to consider for sure. Three Voices is obviously essences that you don't know the tier of for 3 cards. And typically nobody sells this card. It's just way too common and it's pretty bad. It drops from any map that has triple map bosses, by the way. The Professor is basically the exact same thing as the Mayor. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the time, unless you're desperately trying to, finish your Atlas or something. The Beast. Now, Belly of the Beast is an item that used to be absolutely meta back when I started playing this game, but that is years ago. It is no longer what it used to be. And the problem is that it's a unique, and all it offers is really resistances in life, so it doesn't really offer much compared to a regular good rare. And because it's a unique, it's really hard to link it, right? An average of 1,200 fusings if you have 20% quality. So in my opinion, this is a no-go. However, in a league start scenario, this card is typically super common and super, super cheap. Meanwhile, Belly of the Beast, given the meta, can actually be worth a decent amount, especially when well rolled and paired with, for example, the Jeweler's Boon for a 5-link. There is profit to be made, but I don't think it's worth the time. The Innocent is basically like the card for Scours, but it's for Regrets. Essentially, one card of these shouldn't have higher, or should be cheaper than 4 Orbit Regrets. That's kind of how you look at it. Let's just say Orbit Regrets are 2 per Chaos, and then you can give this card for 1C each. Essentially, you're getting 20 Regrets for the price of 10C, you're getting 40 Regrets for 10C, my bad, which means that you're doubling your money, since 40 Regrets would be worth 20C. That being said, overall, anytime that you're converting a currency into another currency through divination cards, it's typically very, very low value and very low returns, because it is botted pretty heavily. Not that I think bots are too worried about Orbit Regrets, however. The Wilted Robe, 7 cards for level 20 Aura Gems. The thing is, there's too many Aura Gems and most of them suck. That being said, you could get lucky and get some good ones. You could do the math on this. I don't think there's a weighting between the different auras, but most of them are just outright bad. However, again, if one of them is particularly expensive for one reason or another, because a build is popular or something like that, or if multiple of them are very, very expensive, certain leagues you'll have Zealotry, Wrath, and Anger, and even Hatred. All of those, like, really good essences at level 21 being worth 1x plus. Let's just say this card is 1C. You can do the math to see whether it's worth it, but typically I would say it's just not worth the time. Alright, Endless Darkness is the exact same thing that I mentioned with Starforge. However, Voidforge, I believe, has not been nerfed in a while compared to Starforge. Voidforge is actually still quite good and necessary in certain builds. It is a pretty niche item, but for example, this league, on the first day of the league, I dropped one of those, or well, on the Saturday of the league, I dropped a Voidforge, and I thought, this kind of sucks, right? I must have lost money by killing this Uber Elder and getting the Voidforge. But turns out it was worth like 3 or 4 exalts, can't quite remember. So there's a lot of value to this weapon in an early stage of a league, which is why I would highly recommend you keep the Endless Darkness in your back pocket in a league start scenario. Alright, Beauty Through Death, 5 cards for the Queen's Sacrifice. Now, the Queen's Sacrifice is the one that gives you Edzir's Reflection, which makes you curse immune, which is a massive deal now that we have no way of getting permanently rid of curses. So it's one of the options. The other is Verity's Veil, the Maven Helmet, but most people will probably opt for the helmets because giving up a weapon slot is typically more annoying. That being said, it is still a very, very good card to consider, especially because it's a very expensive one. And here's the thing about expensive card. Typically, the margins are better because less people can afford it. Typically, when you're buying this card, and then you turn it into a Aziri's Reflection from doing Uber Aziri, you should be making at the very, very least 1 Exalt profit. Now, of course, this does depend on when you are into a league, but in a league start scenario, it can even reach multiple Exalts if there's not enough people who are, have access to this card and have access to Aziri's Reflection. So yeah, that's a very, very, very good card that you absolutely want to keep in mind. The price of protection is one of these other cards. You have 5 cards for a Chateau map with 4 Watchstones, which means T14 plus. Means, you can skip the Atlas if you need to for certain strategies like Uber Aziri farming, which is something I explained in the previous video. Boon of the first ones, you don't know what you're going to get. It's RNG, so I would say stay away. Twilight Moon is for a Twilight Temple for 6 cards. Again, the map is typically just not going to be worth the time. And it's definitely not going to be, something that's really good for currency. However, if you're desperate for it or something, it's one thing you can consider. The Cacophony is basically the exact same thing that I mentioned earlier with the Rite of Elements, except it's 3 Deafening instead of 9 Shrinking, but it's literally the exact same thing. The meta right now, because there's a lot of people farming essences because it's a very, very cheap method of making currency, very low investment and pretty decent returns, is that essences are not all that expensive, except if you get the lucky with the good ones. So I would say it's not worth your time. All right, Sacrifice is one that a lot of people absolutely underestimate. It is a Sicklink's Sacrificial Garb. Now, Sacrificial Garb was actually buffed lastly to give +1 Val Gems as an implicit, which means if you are using any build that uses a Val Gem, you're technically getting a free +1 on your build, which is awesome, right? Think of things like Spark, things like Reeve, think like whatever you want, really. So that is pretty good. And it is item level 100, which means that it has potential to be crafted into, potentially even mirror tier item due to the fact that it can get any mod in the game, and you can put any influence that you want because it does not come with any of the influences. Another advantage is that it is a 4 divination card set, which means it's very, very easy to buy. And finally, again, because it's 6-link, you don't have to 6-link it yourself. Fusings are typically very expensive in a league start scenario. So you're saving a ton of currency. So this is one that you absolutely want to put a lot of priority in a league start scenario if you plan on crafting. It's definitely one of the better ones when it comes to 6-links. Another thing to mention is that if you are doing this one, right, getting this 6-link item level 100, one thing to note is that you should obviously be splitting it in order to get double the value, unless you plan on, getting some influence and stuff later down the line, or any sort of imprints on your actual crafting. But otherwise, it's definitely pretty solid. All right, a dab of ink, 9 cards for Poet's Pen. Obviously, Poet's Pen is no longer meta, especially after this league and what they did to Triggered Spell, so it's not, or Triggered Skills, so it's not worth it. The Nurse is definitely one of the better ones. Now, the problem with it is that it's typically heavily botted and heavily scammed. A lot of people do this scam for the Nurse, the doctors, and the patients. But otherwise, typically a pretty good one to do very, very early. I'm talking the first few days of a league, 3-4 days, before you get enough currency to start doing the doctors instead. The doctors being a much better option. But also much more initial capital to be able to even do it. Meanwhile, the Nurse is typically not too expensive to get into. Now, the issue is a lot of people do it. A lot of people do it, and it's typically price fixed pretty heavily, so it's like impossible to buy the cards. However, if, the price fixers are at home and you happen to be able to get some of them, there is typically some pretty decent profit to be made there. All right, the Master Artisan, 5 cards for a random quality currency, obviously not worth your time. Because quality currency could mean many things. The Life Thief for Xerfe's Heart, 6 cards. Now, this is a surprisingly decent one, especially in a league start scenario, so I'd highly recommend you pay attention to it, but it does depend on the meta of Xerfe's Heart. Some leagues, Xerfe's Heart is super meta, therefore super expensive, and some other leagues, it's trash and nobody's using it, so it's not worth anything. So you do want to pay attention to the meta for sure, as always. All right, 9 cards for 3 Ober Annulments, it's just not worth your time. A random Harbinger Fragment for 4 cards. Depending on the price of the cards, it can be worth. But you have to note that the vast majority of the Harbinger Fragment are absolutely worthless. Right? They're absolutely horrible. But you could technically get lucky and get some of the better ones. But in my opinion, it's just not worth the time. Especially because there's a ton of especially dedicated groups who farm the beachhead maps in a league start scenario, especially. So they are going to be flooding the market with Harbinger Fragments already. All right, the Mad King for the King's Path. Now, the King's Path is prophecy to upgrade the ring. I can't remember the name of it, though. But it is 7 cards, and the prophecy is typically not worth a whole lot. so it's just not worth your time. However, there are some leagues, and in the past, there's been some times where the King's Path, right, Comb's Way, has been very, very expensive. And one thing to note about Comb's Sign into Comb's Way is that the strength, the 10 to 20, and the life gain for enemy hit by your attacks, which is 2 to 4, will actually stay the exact same, right? Because of that, if you are able to snipe some Comb's Sign with 20 strength and 4 life gain for each enemy hit by your attacks, and then you use the King's Path to turn it into Comb's Way, these two rolls, 20 strength and 4 life gain, will actually remain the exact same on the faded version of the unique, and that can add tremendous amount of value. But again, though, you're probably better just buying the King's Path Prophecy. But in the leagues where it's very expensive, then it's definitely an option. All right, Boon of Justice, an offering for 6 cards, complete waste of time. A Harbinger's Orb for 3 cards, complete waste of time. A random 2 implicit corrupted item for 8 cards, complete waste of time. A random Beachhead. Sorry, not a random Beachhead. A T15 Beachhead for 5 cards. Now, this one can be worth actually doing because it's only 5 cards, and T15 Beachheads can be worth a decent amount. But it really kind of depends on the meta. This is one that I would have a look at it once in a while if you see that Beachheads are particularly expensive. Otherwise, not really worth your time. All right, 6 cards for Jewel of Potency. Garbage. All right, 7 years of bad luck. I would say that if your goal is to invest into some mirror-based currency, this is one of your better options. Now, the thing is, mirror shards are pretty cheap in a league start scenario, and 7 years of bad luck are 13 cards, which means it takes a long time to even acquire one single mirror shard. So if you are making a lot of currency in a league start scenario, you're better off buying the mirror shards outright. But the thing about the 7 years of bad luck, which is pretty interesting, is it doesn't follow the same problem than something that House of Mirrors. It's not super expensive in a league start scenario for no reason. It's actually typically undervalued. So you can get these for very, very cheap in the chaos range. And the thing about the chaos range is that you can literally just be, working on your Alice, doing the chaos recipe, getting some chaos here and there, and investing into these cards, because you know that the faster you get that mirror shard, the faster that mirror shard is going to increase in value, and therefore the more value you are getting from these divination cards. Now, one of my friends does this every single league. He league starts, and then he invests everything he makes in the first few days, first few weeks even sometimes, into mirror shards and 7 years bad luck. And then when mirrors start to really rise in price, his money just basically duplicates and duplicates, which is really, really strong because this card starts off very, very cheap. So if you're playing the game and you're looking for an investment which is pretty safe, 7 years bad luck is not bad. All right, Flaring Eclipse Staff. Now, Flaring is physical damage. Eclipse Staff is crit staff. Typically not going to be something you're going to be using. So, especially for 7 cards, yeah, sure, it's level 100. It doesn't have an influence. No, thanks. All right, Monochrome is 3 cards for 10 Sextants. Now, when Sextants are super expensive, for example, like last league, right, we had we had Awakened Sextants at a very, very expensive price. This Divination card here could have been pretty decent, because so long as the base value of the card is the same, once you bought 3 of them, is the same as the cheapest Sextant for a stack of 10 of the cheapest Sextant, well, anytime that you get the not cheapest Sextant, you're going to be making some pretty okay profit. Now, again, it depends on the price of the Sextant. For example, this league, Awakened Sextants are like a chaos each, therefore, this is bad. But in a league where these would be really expensive, then that would be an option. All right, Deck Temptation or Obliteration for 5 cards, absolutely worthless. Obliteration is typically just a few chaos at the start of the league, and it goes down very, very quickly. Alone in the Darkness is one of the ones that is a bit of an exception to the rule that I was mentioning earlier of no gambling, because while a delve item is technically in itself a gamble, the thing is there's many different outcomes of this card. Almost every single outcome of this card actually has a pretty decent value. Almost all of them. Right, so you have Soul Rest, which you can get from this. You also have, for example, the Primordial Chain. Now, of course, the Primordial Chain is no longer what it used to be because Golem Mentalist as a league starter is not really a thing anymore. But still, this card is definitely one that you can consider flipping if the worst outcome possible is around the same price of the set of the cards, because then when you get lucky, or at least when you get the things that are not worth the least, then you're going to be making profit. And in the worst case scenario, you're going to break even. That's typically how you want to look at it. If worst case scenario you break even, then anything else is profit, which is great. All right, Symbodi's Vow for Immortal Fragment. Now, it is a random one. It could be ignorance. It could be, for example, grief. You know, whether you're going to make money or not is up in the air. Now, I don't know if this is weighted or not, but either way, I don't really think it's worth the time. All right, next we have the Lord of Celebration, a Scepter of Celebration, which is T1 attack speed for 4 cards, and it's Shaper, but it's going to be item level 80 because your character turns it in item level 80, and it doesn't specify being higher level, therefore not worth your time. All right, Vanity, Tabula Rasa, same exact thing as Humility. It's going to be great in a league start scenario, but in recent leagues, it's been botted absolutely crazy. It's almost impossible to buy these cards at a good rate. A lot of the time, you'll actually end up buying them around the same than you'll make from the outcome, which is the Tabula. But if you're a dedicated trader, it's one that you absolutely want to try to get your hands on, right? But I'm saying if you're somebody who's not like just absolutely 100% just dedicated to trading, just give up on Vanity. All right, Imperial Legacy is a really, really good card. Not so much from a flipping perspective. Now, there is money to be made there, but it's mostly from a crafting perspective because the bow is 6-link Imperial Bow, which is a 1.45 attack speed base, which is great, and it's at level 100, which is also great because it can get everything, including things like, for example, +2 arrows. It is a set of 22 cards, however, but if I remember correctly, it does drop in leveling zones and early maps, and it's very common from strong boxes as well, so it's a very solid option to craft, for example, +3 bows for Toxic Rain, or even for things like Elemental Hit. So yeah, that's a very, very good one for crafting, for flipping. You're going to make money, but it's typically going to be very little. All right, Burning Blood is one of my favorites, actually, in a league start scenario. It's worth a ton. Almost every league, because a lot of builds want it. For example, Elemental Hit is definitely one of the builds that require Exhaust Blood the most. And it is corrupted, which used to be a problem, but now that we have the actual oils to be able to corrupt to be able to anoint items that are corrupted, that brought these back, and because they're corrupted, they're going to have a special implicit. So if you get anything decent, attack speed, level 21 anger, fire damage reduces life, stuff like that, you can get some absolutely huge payout, or even +1 curse if you're that lucky. That can be worth hundreds of exalts. All right, Primordial. Now this one is really, really good when Golemancers are a thing and are popular. That being said, with what they did to Golemancers in this iteration of Path of Exile 3.15, it's pretty much dead. But this card was actually really, really good. But again, it's the same thing. If 5 of these cards has the price of the lowest outcome that you can get in terms of the Primordial Jewel, then you're going to make profit, because when you get the better ones, you're going to make a hefty profit. Right, so for example, if the Eminence, I believe, is the worst, right, the light blue jewel, white jewel, whatever you want to call it, is worth 20C, and these cards are 4C each, no matter what happens, you're breaking even. And let's just say you get Primordial Might, which is the red and black one, that's worth like an X or 1.5X, like it was in some of the previous league, then you're making absolutely great amounts of currency from flipping this card, and it's only a 5 set. And it drops in a lot of the early maps available. So I would say that this one is one that you do want to pay attention to, but only when Golemancers are, meta. All right, Fidelitas Spike, which is a garbage unique. No one cares that it's double corrupted. Trash. Gluttony, 5 cards. Trash. Not worth the time. All right, Alluring Bounty, which I believe is one that drops some normal Edziri, not herself, but within the normal Edziri zone, or it might just be Uber Edziri. I don't quite remember. It's a set of 10 Exalted Orbs for 7 cards. So it's pretty easy to do math on this, right? If you're paying any more than like 1.3x, you're going to be losing money. A lot of people will try to scam with this card, and what they'll do is they'll basically round down the 1.3 Exalt to like 1.2 when they're paying you out, and then they'll round down the value of the exalts in chaos. So a lot of the time when you are selling this divination card, you want to be careful. It's a super, super common strategy. People will try to make an extra few chaos every single card they buy, and then when they get that stack of 10 exalts after buying 7 cards, well, they've added like almost a full exalt of additional value through just scamming, if you want to call it that, chaos here and there when buying the cards. However, it's a card that is, again, pretty hard to flip, as it is a currency to currency card. The full 20 Chancellors, 4 cards, absolutely not worth your time. Feral's Fur, 7 cards, a very, very good card, a very good flip, and typically through more than just the beginning of the league, it is good for a very long time, because Feral's Fur is typically always in demand for a lot of very endgame builds, And it's pretty rare, right? You got to be farming beasts in T14 plus maps, I want to say, to be able to even spawn Feral. And then when you go kill Feral, I think it's like a, what I want to say, 15 or 20% chance to get his Feral's fur, which all in all makes it very, very hard to actually get, which is why Feral fur retains a lot of its value as the league goes on. So again, this is one that you absolutely want to pay attention to, especially League Start scenario, but even later on, it's one that I used a good amount of times in my latest Zero to Hero series in the last league. All right, Tiebreaker, 5 cards, not worth your time. Glyphic, Prophecy Wand. Now, Glyphic, if I remember correctly, is a high tier of spell damage or something like that. Might have been T1. Prophecy Wand is a good base, and item level 100 is good, but again, is where do you go from here? And now that we have unveils, we can quite easily unveil spell damage or any sort of hybrid of spell damage. So people are actually going for levels on the wands instead, and then they're using unveils or veiled chaos orbs in order to get that % spell damage, especially because there's also spell damage non-chaos extra chaos, which is like the jackpot. All right, Dark Dreams, a Bone Helmet, and it's Elder. Now, the thing is, it's a 4-card set, which is great, and it's an Elder Bone Helmet, which is great, but it will respect your item level when turning in this set of div card, which is item level 80, which means you cannot get +3 minion gem on it, which instantly basically devalues the card to being worth just about nothing from a crafter's perspective. So I would say Dark Dream is the one that you want to stay away from. All right, a Sulfite Scarab for 3 cards. Now, back when Sulfite Scarabs, the higher tier, were extremely expensive, it's something you could have considered, but nowadays, no thanks. 7 cards for an Annul, absolutely not worth your time. A Fishing Rod for 12 cards, not worth your time. Now, Nuke's Crown, however, is basically the exact same thing as Dark Dreams, but this time the Bone Helmet is Elder, but it is also item level 100, which means it can get +3 socketed minion gem, which is absolutely mandatory for these helmets, especially for Spectres. Now, if you're not talking about Spectres, you could go Dark Dreams, but I think Nuke Crown is just a much better option, especially because the way to craft these is very, very easy through fossils. You can use Craft of Exile to figure that out. But yeah, Nuke Crowns is one that you absolutely want to pay attention to. Now, the thing about Nuke Crown is that it's not that good when it comes to flipping it. What you want to do is get that level 100 Bone Helmet that's Elder, and then you want to craft it up and sell it up for a much larger amount of profit. And again, there's some pretty easy things that you can do in order to craft these helmets properly. So that's one thing that I would say. But Nuke Crown is very, very good. All right, a Master Seeks Help random one and 5 cards. This is one of the Master Seeks Help prophecies, which is where it just says you'll find a given master like Einhar or Alva in your map. Absolutely not worth your time. Price of Loyalty, Skin of the Loyal, item level 25, 2 implicit. Now, this card is actually a banger of a divination card, and you absolutely want to be taking advantage of it in a League Start scenario. Because this Skin of the Loyal here is a double corrupted, which means it could get +1 gems, +2 AoE, +2 proj, +2 duration, any of those combinations. It is only a 4 divination card set, and I believe it's actually quite common. And the cool thing is that it's also item level 25, which means it blocks a lot of the bad corruptions, and it's increasing your odds of getting the good corruptions, such as +1 socketed gems, +2, to multiple different types of gems, as I've already mentioned. So the Price of Loyalty is one that you absolutely want to remember, especially in a League Start scenario. There's a ton of money to be made there. Now, the thing is, though, it is a bit of a gamble, but almost any Skin of the Loyal will be selling in a League Start scenario, so you're not really going to be losing any money, and when you get the right set of colors, they're going to be worth a lot, because they're basically a +1 Tabula if there's nothing else on it. And, of course, if you get a good implicit on top of that, they can be worth a lot of currency. Some of the better ones for things like Essence Drain's Contagion, I've seen selling for somewhere in the ballpark of 40 exalts. Now, it probably wouldn't be the same anymore, but it's still a very, very, very solid card to consider. All right, next we have a Heroic Shot. Obviously, 1 card for 17 chromatics, not worth your time. Remembrance, 8 cards for Precursors. Now, the problem with this is that I believe this card is very rare, and the Precursors is corrupted, which means it can't be divine or anything like that. Can't be, you also can't put catalysts on it or anything like that. So it's not great, but it is good for gambling. Again, though, I personally like to stay away from gambling, especially early into a league, because I'd rather have a more consistent gain into my currency. But it's one that you can consider, especially later on in the league, because there's a ton of value to precursors, especially if you get things like +1 Frenzy, +1 Power Charge, +1 Endurance Charge, or a lot of other modifiers have a lot of value, but the plus charges are typically the ones that will net you absolutely ridiculous amounts of currency. Alright, more is never enough. A random gilded scarab for 7 cards, absolutely not worth the time. Ancient Doom for 5 cards, typically not going to be worth the time due to the fact that Ancient Doom is extremely cheap. The Bargain, which is a random pure breachstone for 5 cards. This one is one that you absolutely want to pay attention to. But remember, it's the exact same thing. If these 5 cards, at the minimum, are around the same price, then the worst or the cheapest of the pure breachstones, then is one thing you want to consider. Because then if you get any of the better pure breachstones, you'll be making profit. So I would say Bargain's quite good. Azaren's Reward is actually not bad either, because it can give you Watcher's Eyes. Now, the issue is it's a 9-card set, which is kind of annoying, but they're typically very cheap. But it's not guaranteed to give you Watcher's Eyes. It can also give you that purple stone that is used for minion builds. I can't remember, or for golem builds. I can't remember the name of it. But one thing to note is that it is corrupted, which means, again, it can't be divine, but it also means, because it's a jewel, that it can have very, very good implicit. Things like corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you, 1% mana reserved, penetration, right? There's a lot of different things that can that it can give you that are worth a decent amount. So again, though, it is gambling, which means I would personally stay away from it, especially early, but in a later stage, it's something to consider. Alright, level 1 Skeletons, 23 quality for 6 cards is garbage. The Eye of Terror. Now, we absolutely abused this Divination card in this particular league start, me and my duo. We were basically getting 8 of these for around 10C each, right? Which was giving us a pure Chayula for about 80C, which was around 1.2x or so in the league start this league. And the blessing was worth about 3 to 4 exalts. And in a pure Chayula, it is guaranteed, which means we were getting about 250 to 300% value. And this wasn't counting anything else, right? Pure Chayula is a very high level zone, which means it drops red maps, it drops a lot of other stuff, good bases, etc. And of course, it doesn't even consider the drops from Chayula himself outside of the blessing, which is guaranteed. So this one is one that you can absolutely abuse. Now, the problem is it's a very rare card, and the supply is very, very limited. And if you want to buy it out, then you're going to be pushing the price up a ton, which is why we were only able to get maybe 4 or 5 of these sets in the league start. But every time we were able to finish a set, we were making at least 2x profit, so it was pretty insane. One that I would absolutely keep an eye on. All right, the Demon, Headhunter. Now, it is corrupted, but it's a Headhunter, so no matter what, it's going to be worth something, and it's double corrupted. Now, unfortunately, it is item level 80, which, you know, is going to fit your character level, which means you can't get any of the crazy stuff like quantity. I think that's actually the only thing you can't get, but you can still get, you know, crit chance, crit multi, all res, attack speed, you know, all that good stuff. So, it's really, really, really good. However, typically, it's going to be a lot cheaper to finish either a Doctor card or a Fiend card compared to a Demon card sets. But if you can afford it, and if you're willing to gamble a bit, it's one that can pay out extremely, extremely well. Alright, Kali's Prophecy for a Faded Unique item is pretty trash. You never know what you're going to get. Soul Ripper for 6 cards. Now, Soul Ripper has just gotten, you know, it just got nerfed pretty damn hard with all the flash nerfs. But in a league where Soul Ripper is meta, this card is typically very, very good. Because the way to get a Soul Ripper is that you need to get one of the rarest vials to drop from the temple boss, right, in the Temple of Atsuatl. So then you can actually go from, I don't remember the name of the unupgraded, to Soul Ripper. But this 6-card set gives you Soul Ripper. The problem is, this card drops in maps which nobody really likes to farm, like Ancient City or Val Temple. So it's a pretty rare card. I think it's not quite the rarity of a Doctor, but it's a very, very rare card. However, because Soul Ripper is a cheap item, it's typically quite cheap itself. So it's one that you do want to pay attention to, but you don't want to, like, prioritize, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Alright, Overpowering Opal Ring, which is an Elder item level 100. Now, Overpowering, if I remember correctly, is T1 elemental damage with attack skills. I could be wrong about that, however. And it is Elder item level 100, which sounds good, but the problem is this Overpowering modifier is not an Elder modifier, which means you cannot actually use this modifier in order to do anything with some Awaken or Orbing shenanigans. but it is still an Opal Ring, and it's Elder, and it's item level 100, which means, if you remember what I said earlier about the Shaper Opal Ring being Awakener Orb with the Elder Ring, you can basically do the exact same thing here, but roles reversed, right? You can use the Opal Ring Elder item level 100, get Critical Strike Multiplier as a suffix, and then Awakener Orbit with any ring that is Shaper with Assassin's Mark, and you've got yourself a very, very good meta ring for any build that is critical in Elemental, which is, well, a lot of builds, right? There's a ton of builds that can use those rings. So it's one thing to note, and it's only 3 cards, which makes it very, very nice. This is definitely one that can be extremely good, not so much for flipping, but for crafting purposes. All right, the deal is a Cartography Scarabs for 5 cards, not worth. Vaults of Interior for 4 cards, not worth your time. A fishing item for 8 cards, not worth your time. All right, Sucker of the Sinless, Bottled Faith for 6 cards. This is definitely one that's one of the better ones, you know, comparable to something like, for example, the Nurse cards, right, around the same price tag and around the same profit margins. Now, it is a very mainstream card that people flip. Now, of course, Bottled Faith got nerfed really, really hard, but it is still, right now, the best flask in the game, even after the nerf. So it's still heavily in demand and pretty expensive. So Sucker of the Sinless is definitely an option for flipping, especially early before people even have access to farming Cortex in the first few days of a league. This is one that I would absolutely pay attention to and keep my eyes on. I gotta stop saying absolutely. All right, Underground Forest. I don't think I've ever seen that. 10 Awakened Sextant for 4 cards. Again, if Awakened Sextants are super meta like they were last league, this is something you could consider, but not worth the time otherwise. The Escape, 7 League Steps. Now, the cool thing about this is that you can turn it into a level 1 character, and these 7 League Steps are going to be level 1, or item level 1, and then you can corrupt them to try to get movement speed as a corruption implicit. Better yet, if you enchant them with move speed, if you haven't been hit recently, and then try to corrupt them for move speed, you can basically get 70% move speed boost at the highest, which is absolutely insane. They're worth a ton, but there's a lot of RNG there. Otherwise, in terms of the Escape, the div card itself, trying to turn into 7 League Steps, there's typically going to be some profit there, almost always, but it's not going to be one of these cards which is going to make you rich. Alright, Deathly Designs is a 7 card for a 21-23 trap gem. I mean, just look at the price of the 21-23 trap gem. Look at the price of the div card for 7 cards. Probably not going to be worth it. The Chosen is for Skin of the Lords. Now, nobody uses Skin of the Lords. Pretty much, almost nobody. People use Skin of the Loyals, but they don't really use Skin of the Lords, so I would just ignore Chosen. Alright, Chimera's Cut is a random scarab for 2 cards. You don't know what you're going to get. In my opinion, not worth your time. Divine Justice, same thing here. You don't know what you're going to get as the lab enchant. You don't know what you're going to get in terms of the helmet. And not only that, it's going to be low item level, right? It's going to be item level 80, which means it can't get any of the juicy influence mods. Not worth your time. The Fishmonger, Albino Row of Feather for 4 cards. Skip. The Bones, level 21, Val Summon Skeletons. No quality, I believe. Again, you can do the math. Look at the price of the Val Summon Skeletons. Probably not going to be worth your time 99% of the time. Master Seek Scalp Nico, not worth your time. The Craving. Now, this is another one that we made a ton of currency in this league start with because we were buying the Unending Hunger for about 1x each, and then we were selling, the Craving for 1x each and selling the Unending Hunger for 4.5, which means we were making about 0.5 exile profit per 4 cards, or 0.5 exile profit per 4 cards purchased, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they were moving extremely quickly. So we made a lot of money from this Divination card, but it is definitely one of the rarer cards and one that has limited supply, and you don't want to push the price up, but it's one of the good ones for league start for sure. I'm talking about the first few days. All right, Etched in Blood, a double corrupted Rigwald's Quills. Now, this was really cool when it came out because back then Rigwald's Quills was still pretty good. Nowadays, however, Rigwald's Quills is not really used by anybody, as a rare quiver is just significantly better. So in my opinion, not worth the time. That being said, it's really cheap for the this card is really cheap, and it can give you some cool stuff like, you know, chain or +1 arrow, which can be worth a ton. So if you're feeling lucky, why not? You're not losing a whole lot. All right, another one of the Perennis Manners, we don't really care. Strategist, definitely one of the good ones. Now, it does depend on the meta and whether Inspired Learning is in demand or expensive, period. But typically, it's always going to be at least decent. And because it's corrupted and it's a jewel, you can't, you don't have to divine it, right? Because it's an inspired learning. There's no divining or anything like that. So the corrupted implicit is basically free. So you could get something like, 1% mana reserved. You could get something like corrupted blood cannot be afflicted on you. There's a lot of different corruptions that are very, very good that are going to increase the value of this. So again, if the price of these 6 divination cards together is the same or less than any inspired learning period, you're basically making guaranteed profit. All right, the Cheater is definitely one of the ones that is very, very gamble heavy, but it's only a 3-card set, which makes it kind of nice, right? Because yes, you don't know what you're going to get. It is going to be level 6 Awakened Gems with 20 qualities, so you basically have to look at the cheapest level 6 Awakened Support Gem with 20 quality, and then look at the price of 3 of these cards, and then look at, think and be like, is this worth it, right? Is it worth it for me to gamble this amount of currency? What's the most amount of currency that I can lose, and then what's the most amount of currency that I can gain, and then look at everything in between and come up with your own answer. I will say, however, a lot of people that I know that are very, very advanced traders love this divination card, and they do consider it to be worth it. So it's one thing to note. All right, Ticker's table, 5 fossils for 5 cards, not worth it. Easy Stroll, again, a map, but it's a terrace map. It doesn't say the tier, however, but it is an 8 modifier map. Definitely something you could pay attention to if you have a challenge. There's a lot of leagues where there's challenges to complete 8 mod maps, but realistically, not worth. All right, the Prodigy of Lunaris. Look at the price of the Dying Sun. Cut it in half. If the cards are cheaper, you're making profit. And note that Dying Sun modifiers and the rolls on them matter a lot, right? The AoE matters, but also the amount of charges. Now, of course, they just changed the Dying Sun, so it's a little bit different, but the rolls still matter. There's a very big difference between a horrible roll and a good roll. Because of that, it's a card that, if the price of the set of card is cheaper or around the same price than the worst possible Dying Sun, typically you're always going to make profit. So it's one thing that you can consider for sure. Eldritch Decay, really, 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 really strong card. Now, the thing that people don't know about this, or I guess they don't know about this, is that it can give you any of the Uber Elder Fragment, including the Shaper ones, so the 2 red ones and the 2 gray ones. And it's 4 cards, which is very, very easy to get. Not only that, it's acquired very, very easily. It's a super common div card, so you can get quite a few of these cards, and on average, it's going to take you 16 of these cards to make a full Uber Elder set, and these are typically going to be appearing on the market before people have even killed Shaper. Matter of fact, in this specific league, I was fighting Uber Elder before anyone had even yet to encounter Shaper, because we were using this set of divination card. So for party players, this is awesome. It's not really that you're going to be able to sell the fragments, however, because nobody's really going to be buying them, right? If they can't even progress to Shaper, chances are they probably can't kill Uber Elder either. But there is something to be said about the fact that if you're in a duo or any sort of group play where you have a boss killer, this is a card that you want to pay attention to. All right, Council of Cat for a feral item, in my opinion, not worth. Sure, you get Feral's Fur, which is great, but it is weighted, so your odds are pretty bad. And it's gambling, so I don't like it, but it is only 4 cards, and if you're feeling lucky, it's one thing that you could go for, but again, I personally would not. The Tumbleweed, a Wasteland map, yep, we don't talk about that. Machinimitz, 2 implicits corrupted for 6 cards. Now, Machinimitz in pretty much any league is very, very cheap, but they can be worth a lot in a league start scenario, especially if miners are very, very popular. But overall, it's not great. However, they are double corrupted, which means you can get a lot of really cool stuff on there, right? Frenzy charges would be great, because it just gives you more damage. Spell crit could be good. Cast speed would actually not be good, my bad. But curses could be good, like elemental weakness, for example, right? So there's a lot of things that you can get on these gloves. So you just got to look at cheapest pair of Machinimitz versus the price of 6 of these cards. If the price is cheaper for the 6 cards, chances are you're always, always, always going to make profit. Gifts of Asenats is the exact same thing I just explained. The only difference is that Asenats Gentle Touch are very meta for a while now, ever since they nerfed Explodey Chest. Asenats Gentle Touch is one of the things that kind of came in to replace that. So these are super meta, and I'll let you in on a secret. This card is super, super good in a league start scenario when it comes to flipping it, because pretty much any of the outcomes is going to be worth a ton, And then when you get lucky on these implicit, you can get some ridiculous lucky payouts, or jackpots, if you want to call it that. Another win for Song of the Sakima. Now, this is a pretty decent one. It's typically not going to give you a ton of profit, but it's going to be enough that it's going to be worth it. One thing about this card is that it's only a set of 4, and it's typically pretty affordable, and it's hard to push the market up because there's typically a decent amount of supply, which means that you're able to get, quite a few of them before the market starts to, change and adapt. So Song of the Sakima, for those who don't know, is made to turn the Asenath's whatever into the Asenath's Chance, which is the helmet that is very, very popular for bow builds, especially elemental hits. You put in all your debuffs, and then whenever you hit a bow attack, it's going to trigger them. So it's kind of like having a curse on hit, plus any sort of debuffing, but without having to click any buttons. It's awesome. So it's a very, very good card, one that I would highly, highly keep in mind. Greatest Intentions, a Savior with double corruption. Now the problem is, a Savior is a physical weapon, which means you will want quality on it. And if it's corrupted, you can't put quality on it, which means it's going to be hard for those implicits to make up for that lack of quality, period. Especially if you're thinking about putting 30 quality on a Savior. And it's 10 cards. So yeah, no thanks for the Greatest Intentions. The intentions were not that great. The White Knight is a new card from last league, I believe, and it's actually amazing. It's a 6-link Astral Plate, which is already good, and it's item level 100, but it's also Crusader. What that means is that, of course, it can get things like Explodey, Power Charge on Crit, and whatnot. It's a very, very strong card, especially when Explodey chests are meta, and because it's a 6-link Astral Plate, it's already going to be the best possible base for a lot of builds. So this is one that you want to pay attention to if you have a little bit more currency, because it's typically, a little bit more expensive. To be expected, it's the best possible base, item level 100, and it's Crusader. But yeah, White Knight is really good. Prometheus' Harmony is a one-hand weapon, double influence, item level 100. Now, the problem with weapons is that the bases almost always matter, so that's a skip for me. Sustenance and Energy from Within for 3 cards. Now, this card is sick. It's really, really, really good in a league start scenario, especially because Energy from Within, even corrupted, has very little range on the mods that it can get. I think it's like 3 to 6% ES or something like that. But the biggest reason is that 2 implicit corrupted is going to increase the odds of getting good ones, right? For example, corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you, but the big one is obviously 1% mana reserve, because Energy from Within is often used for things like Aura Bots, because it makes them a lot tankier when you put it in the right slot on your passive tree. But yeah, this is one that I believe came out last league, and one of my buddy made a ton of currency from this card because nobody really knew about it because it was brand new. It's actually very important to go through PoEDB before a league starts and look at all the different divination cards, because you might not know about them, and GGG might not tell you about them, but they will be data mined before the league even starts. So yeah, Sustenance is really, really solid card in a league start scenario. Peaceful Moments is a bit of a gamble, but the thing is, in a league start scenario, every single Timeless Jewel is super good and super expensive and very, very sought after. Even the worst ones, like Militant Faith. Or not Militant Faith, I mean Elegant Faith. No, Elegant Hubers. I don't remember the name of the white one. Whatever. And it's a 5-card set, and it's not that rare. So I think we made like 4 or 5 sets of these in this league, my duo and I. And we got pretty unlucky, and still we made quite a hefty amount of profit from this divination card. So Peaceful Moments is definitely one that you want to write down. The Awakened is a double influence jewelry, item level 86. So that's pretty cool, but the problem is, again, same exact thing that I was mentioning earlier. Jewelry could be a belt, and it could be a bad base, and then you lost all your money. If it's a ring and it's a bad base, you lost all your money. Of course, if it's the amulet, you do have the recipe to make up for it, but it's still not great. So you can kind of view it as a bit of a gamble, and personally, I would stay away from it. A Familiar Call, Jewelry of Farrell, which is Shaper and Hunter. Same exact thing. It's a piece of jewelry. Now, you do know the influences here. It doesn't just say double influence. You do know that it's going to be Shaper and Hunter, but the thing is, it's a piece of jewelry, which you don't know what it's going to be. And it will have Aspect of the Cat on it because it's of Farrell, but yeah, no one really cares about that because you're going to be rerolling it anyways. But it's only 3 cards. So there's definitely an opportunity to make currency on this if you get in on it early enough. especially if, you know, certain specific mod combinations are really, really good from Shaper and Hunter. The problem is the way that people typically craft jewelry, which is double influence, like especially amulets, is that they'll take a mod from a given influence and they'll awaken it with a mod from another influence, like +1 int and +1 cold, right? For example. The problem with something like this is that the influences are already there, which means that getting the modifiers that you want from the right influences that you want is extremely hard. So again, probably one that I would stay away from. All right, the long con is basically any of the Conqueror's Exalted Orb, you know, be it Redeemer, Crusader, etc. So just look at the cheapest one of them, divide that cost by 4, look at the price of the card. If it's cheaper, you're basically guaranteed profit. And this is especially good when there's a very big discrepancy between the cheapest of the exalts from the Conquerors and the most expensive. Like, for example, some leagues, a Crusader exalt is going to be like 1x, but the Hunter is going to be like 3x. That's when this card can start to be pretty good. And it's only a set of 4, which is not bad. All right, Gulf is a Thread of Hope, double implicit corrupted. This one depends on the meta, and it is an Uber Elder drop, I believe. But the thing is, Thread of Hope really matters on the size of the ring, right? If you have a Thread of Hope, which is very large, it can be very good. And let's say you have one that is very small, it can be very bad. Now, it really depends on the meta, and it depends on the builds that are actively using Thread of Hope, but the size matters a lot. And not only the size, the amount of negative resistance on it matters a lot. And because this is corrupted, you don't have any control over any of that, which is why, personally, I'd kind of stay away from it. Unless all of them, right, there's a different build that is using every single one of the different sizes, then it's definitely something you can consider because it's too implicit, which means it can get any of the really cool stuff. All right, the Bitter Blossom, level 21, level 21, 23 Chaos Gem, 3 cards. I don't know. I personally would stay away from it. I think because I'm not a big fan of gambling again. Triskaidekaphobia, or the Fear of Number 13, which is kind of funny because it's 13 cards for a T13 map with 30 quality and 100% Delirious with 8 modifiers. Now, the thing about this is that this card is actually super underrated, but only if we don't have access to Delirium. So what this does is that, of course, it's 13 cards, which, you know, is a lot. And I believe this card drops from Uber Zeri, or any of the endgame bosses even. So 13 cards is a lot, right? It takes a while to farm, to trade for it. But you do get a T13 map, which is also not great, right? It's not a T16 or even a T14 plus. And 13 quality is also not, you know, the greatest, but it does have 100% Delirium, which means that you're not spending the money for 100% Delirious on your map, which is 5 Delirium orbs. Let's just say the Delirium orbs are 10C each for the cheapest. Let's just say that means that you're saving 50C, right? Depending on the price of the card, of course. You're saving up to 50C just for the Delirium itself. And this is also another mod that people are not paying attention to, is that it has 8 modifiers. So 8 modifiers means that the map is guaranteed to be Omega juiced. So if you're playing a build which can run any of the map mods, this is actually a bit of a secret, but this card here is actually super good. Because, of course, you know, you don't have to buy those Delirium orbs, and you can technically get things like Skittering or Breach or some of the better ones, right? It doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get the bad Delirium percent either. I have a friend a couple leagues ago who made a ton of currency from running this card. I believe he even made a YouTube video about it. I can't quite remember, however. All right, Unrecorded Love, 16 cards for 19 Mirror Shards, so it's kind of the equivalent of, you know, investing into Mirror Shards, which again can be very, very strong in a league start scenario. Typically, people are going to absolutely undersell these cards. I believe people were selling these cards for like 1 or 2x. This league, like even this league, 1 or 2x. So let's just say 1.5x on average means that you can get this full entire set for 24x for 19 mirror shards, which is just shy of a mirror, which means you're getting mirrors for less than 30x. So if you're somebody who intends to make a ton of currency in a league start scenario, and you know, like, I'm not going to be able to buy a mirror, nobody's going to want to sell me a mirror for like 20, 30x, well, just start investing into these Unrecorded Loves as fast as humanly possible, because they are going to go up in price very quickly. All right, the cash, random jewelry, 6 cards, trash. Inspired Learning, I already mentioned this with the Strategist, is the exact same thing, except this time it's not corrupted, which means there's no gambling whatsoever. You know exactly what you're going to get. 8 cards, do the math, easy clap. All right, Desecrated Virtue is a level 6 Awakened Gems with 23 quality, which is kind of like the Cheater, except instead of being 3 cards, it's 9, which makes it way more annoying, and the only real difference here is that you get 23 quality instead of, is it 20? Or it might actually be 0. Again, though, this is a card which you can easily do the math on it, look at the value of these different Awakened Gems, look at the value of the card, and basically make your own decision. I would say that personally, I'm not a fan of it, but I do know that a lot of my buddies who are, very advanced traders, as I mentioned earlier, love these cards. I guess it's because there's quite a few of these different Awakened Gems that are worth a ton of currency, especially early on in the league. And these cards may or may not be price fixed, or maybe they're just undersold. I really don't know. I've never even really considered them. All right, Brother Stash. Nobody's really going to sell this to you. It's 5x for 1 card. They're just going to turn it in. Unchained. 2 double corrupted phase breakers for 4 cards. It sounds like it would be good, but the problem is the phase breakers, right? The rolls on them, you won't be able to divine them if they're corrupted, which is not a problem if you're using the phase breakers just for the 30% critical strike multiplier, for example, on an Aura Stacker. But unfortunately, ever since the nerf to Aura Stackers in general, nobody really uses phase breakers anymore, I believe. So it's probably not so hot anymore. But I do remember back in Heist League, I recommended to so many people to buy these phase breakers with good corruptions like Spell Crit, +1 Frenzy, stuff like that, or even levels, right? +2, +1, stuff like that. They were very, very, very strong and very cheap compared to the Awakener gloves. All right, the Unexpected Prize, Attribute Transforming Jewel. I don't even know what that is. I'm guessing it's one of the ones that changes, for example, Strength into Dex, Dex into Int, stuff like that. Not worth. These jewels are absolutely worthless. Curse Words, Mauve Mischief, 13 cards, trash. Journalist, Helmet, Double Veiled, 10 cards, trash. Haunting Shadows, Metamorph Item, 4 cards. Now, this card is actually really funny because it has the potential to make you very, very, very rich in a League Start scenario, because one of the items that drops, which is a Metamorph item, is Astral Projector. And Astral Projector is super strong on specific builds like Pyroclast Mines, for example, or even Blazing Salvo, or even Fireball Miner, my build that I was playing at this league, because it makes all your projectiles kind of like shotgun, right? They don't go all over the place. They all shotgun. They all go for one target. So Astral Projector is really good. Now, the thing is, I don't know the odds of getting Astral Projector, but it's kind of funny because just this league, I had 2 of my buddies who got Astral Projector on the first day of a league. Last league, I had 2 of my other buddies who got Astral Projector from this set of card. So I don't know if everybody was just incredibly lucky, but Haunting Shadows does seem to maybe be not super balanced in terms of the weighting for the Astral Projector, which is something that you can 100% take advantage of. So pay attention to this card in a League Start scenario. Acclimatization, or whatever, how you pronounce that. 2 cards, 20 alts. Not really worth your time, unless alterations are crazy expensive, but typically, because it's only 2 cards, people are just going to turn them in. Whiteout, Cosprey's Malice. Now, I'm not sure Cosprey's Malice is really meta anymore, but even last league when it was super meta, the problem with this set of Divination card is that it's 8 cards for an item which is not particularly expensive, but there is money to be made here because the rolls on Cosprey's Malice matter a lot. For example, you could have a Cosprey's Malice with any amount of attack speed, like 8%, which is the lowest, I believe, for 50C. Meanwhile, a 14% attack speed roll would sell for like 1x, which might be like 100C. So there's a massive difference, and of course, the amount of flat, cold damage to spells also matters. I've sold some Cospreys for up to 5-6 times the value of a regular Cospreys due to the rolls on them in the past. So it's one of these cards where, you're looking to never lose money, and then if you get lucky, you'll make a lot of currency. And because the range is only 8 to 14, your odds are pretty decent of getting something decent. All right, Society's Remorse is just 1 card, doesn't matter. A Diamond Ring, Elder plus Shaper, item level 100. Now, that sounds like it would be really good, but the problem is, nobody really uses Diamond Ring in the end game because the amount of crit that they give is typically not worth losing the implicit of something like an Opal Ring or even something like a 2-stone ring for resistances. So yeah, Diamond is not a super end game ring, but it is Elder and Shaper. But the problem is the exact same thing I was mentioning earlier. Typically when people are making double influence items, they want to have these 2 influence separate, and then they woke them together to have 1 mod of each of the influences. If both influencers are already there, What can you do? Not much. So yeah, that's a skip from me. Random League specific unique, that's a skip from me, not worth the time. Eternity Shroud, 2 double corrupted. I believe this card is actually new, but for 7 cards, it would be really, really cool. But the problem is Eternity Shroud in recent leagues has basically been worth absolutely nothing. And another problem, other than the fact that Eternity Shroud lost a lot of its value, is that the 5% on the Eternity Shroud, the 5% more damage per item equipped or whatever, is very, very, very important. If you don't have that, you're losing a ton of damage on your build. And I think the range is 3 to 5. So overall, I would probably skip the Astromancer. All right, Eldritch Bone Helmet, Concentrated Effect. This is basically an Elder Bone Helmet of item level 89, which can roll plus 3 minion gems, which is 86. But instead of being, rare, it's blue. But it's basically the exact same thing as the one that I was talking about earlier, right? Nuke's Crown. It's still a Bone Helmet, and it's still Elder. The only difference is there's a Conic effect on it, which no one cares about. You're probably going to be rerolling that anyways. Omeocons for 6 cards can be good. Depends on the meta. Sometimes Omeocons are very, very strong, especially for things like Archmage, things like Mana Stacking Miners. Now, of course, that's not super meta in the current state of the game, but who knows when it's going to come back. It's one that you want to keep looking at once in a while when Omeocons are meta. All right, Love Through Ice is one of these cards where it's kind of like the Strategist, right? You want to look at the price of a random Natural Instinct, a regular one, price of 4 of these cards, and if it's anything alike, you're probably going to be guaranteed profit because you're getting 2 free implicit. And I say free because you're paying for a regular non-corrupted, or as long as you're paying for somewhere around that price, and you're getting 2 corruptions, which may very well be worth a ton. Right, something like a 1% mana reserved on a Natural Instinct is very, very expensive, and Corrupted Blood, kind of the same situation. All right, Draped in Dreams is another one of the 6-link body armor. It is Influence. You don't know what Influence is going to be. It can be any of the 6 ones, but it is item level 100, and it is a 6-link, and it is 5 cards, which is very strong, especially in a league start scenario. Now, of course, this card is going to drastically decrease in value as the league goes on, as people are going to care more about the actual bases of their armors, and they're going to care about the influence. But early, it's basically a 6-link, and you don't really have to worry about the influence. Matter of fact, it might as well not be there. But if you get lucky, the fact that there is influence on there, instead of being lucky with something like, I don't know, a good resistance, you could get lucky with something like a good amount of crit dispels or a good amount of basic tax crit on your chest piece. And all of a sudden, you're looking at many, many times more expensive. So I believe this is a brand new card, and it's one that you really want to write that down. Because my party made my duo and I made a lot of currency from this one in this league, because I guess nobody knew about it. And it was, I think we were paying 5C per card. So 25C for a 6-link item level 100 influenced item. We weren't able to buy a ton of them because people caught on and the market quickly adjusted. But that's a lot of 6-links for very, very cheap. All right, the Patient, it's kind of the same thing than the Nurse, but it's for even cheaper, right? If you don't have a lot of currency, this is one that is pretty good to look into. But again, the problem is this one is typically hard to buy because it's price fixed and because it's botted really, really heavily. Matter of fact, you could buy one of these Patient yourself and then list it for, let's say, 1 chaos under the market value and just see how much you get spammed for it. It's pretty crazy. So that's why it's not that great of a deal. But, you know, if you get there early, it's a great way to be able to slowly but surely work your way up to a Headhunter if you're not able to afford nurses or if you're not able to afford outright doctors. All right, the Long Watch, the Vigil, which is the jewel. Now, it did get nerfed pretty heavily, so we're not going to talk about that. A Warlord Ursine Pelt Fecund, which is T1 life, if I remember correctly. Now, the problem is it's item level 80, right? Because your character is item level 80, which means it can't get some of the juicier mods, but it can at least get +1 power charge, which is typically what people care about the most. But things like, for example, nearby enemies have negative fire res. That's something you'll have to give up due to the fact that it's level 80. But an Ursine Pelt is not the worst base for evasion bases, and the fact that it's 80 means you can still get things like +1 power charge, which is quite good. All right, One with Nothing Corrupted. Now, this is another one of the ones that you'll just do the math yourself. See the price of a 1 with Nothing, divide that by 5 if the cards are anywhere near like it. you're basically going to make money because you don't have to divine. There's no rolls on a one with nothing, right? You just get what you get. You get the node that you get, and the fact that it's corrupted means that you're getting an advantage on it for free because it could be things like corrupted blood. Winter's Embrace, 3 implicit synthesized Circle of Fear. It's a huge gamble because you have no control over the implicits, which are very important, but you also have no control over the affixes. Like, you know, is it going to be buff effect or is it going to be cold res? No matter what, in my opinion, not worth the time. I would highly skip this one. Another one of the Master Seeks Help, not worth your time. There's not enough money to be made there. Now, the Enthusiast is actually a very interesting one because it's only 3 cards for a double corrupted Victario's Influence. And the thing is about Victario's Influence is it's used by Orobots, but it's also used by a ton of other builds. Like, for example, Miners, especially Delvers, right? A lot of Delving builds use Victarios due to the fact that it's kind of like a 7-link, and also it helps a lot with things like mana. And because it's double implicit, and some of those builds take a lot of advantage from many of these the potential outcomes, like +2 AoE projectile, duration gems, +1 socketed gems, 50% damage. It's actually a super good card, and the funny thing is it's super cheap. It's really cheap for this card in a league start scenario. People undervalue it tremendously. Broken Promise, a diamond ring. So again, it's a diamond ring. We're not going to pay too much attention to it. It's not a very good base. Sure, it's 2 implicit synthesized, but again, that could just be trash. Actually, it doesn't matter if it's a diamond ring, my bad, because it is 2 implicit synthesized, which means it loses its crit anyways. So I guess that's just a gamble, but the amount of implicits that you can get on a ring and the amount of good implicits, unless this card is like a chaos, it's just not worth the time. All right, Brush, Paint, and Palette for the Artist. Now, the Artist, I believe, is the one that gives you the Enhanced card. So it's like 1/5 of the card, 1/5 of the card that gives you the Enhanced thingy. Yeah, whatever. Let's just skip that one. Deadly Joy, Torrent's Reclamation, double implicit. Now, this is another one that, unfortunately, Torrent's Reclamation was nerfed pretty heavily this league. It was nerfed by like 50%, actually. The amount of action speed that it gave you, which is very sad. But Torrent's Reclamation is still a very good option if you can't quite afford a Headhunter and you are trying to increase your mapping speed by a large margin, because the action speed is very good. And this is another one of these cards that is very undersold early game, that has a ton of potential and a ton of value because it's double implicit, right? Because it's double implicit, the same thing happens here, that if you get a good implicit, you're basically getting it for free because you don't have to risk double corrupting it or anything like that. All right, Victario's Influence, but for 6 cards, not worth the time. A random Timeless Jewel, but this time it's double corrupted for 4 cards. It's kind of the same thing that I was talking about earlier. You want to look at the cheapest possible Timeless Jewel and then look at that. Now, the problem is a lot of the Timeless Jewel, they need to be divined in order to really gain a lot of value, right? Because different divines is going to give different rolls on all the small nodes, but also on the keystones. So, for example, if you want to get a corrupted Lethal Pride, and you weren't able to get of Combs, because it was corrupted, so you can't get Chainbreaker, well, tough luck, it won't sell. So it's a pure loss, which is why I would probably stay away from it. But if you're feeling gambly, it's an option. All right, random item, Influence, 7 cards, not worth your time. There's way too many uniques in this game. Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline, yeah, no one cares about 8% move speed, so it's not going to be worth. Anyways, it's just a single card, so people are just going to turn it in. Random Divination card for 4 cards, yeah, I'm not sure, or sorry, Divination Scarab for 4 cards, not worth the time. Megalomaniac for 3 cards, but it is corrupted. Now, every Megalomaniac is corrupted, so essentially you just don't really know what you're going to get. The problem is there's like a million different nodes that can spawn on a Megalomaniac, and there's only a very select few and a very select few combination that are worth anything. So in my opinion, this is gamble. This is bad. Luminous Trove. Now, this gives you a Voices, which is great, but the problem is that you don't know how many passives you're going to get. You get a 7, you could get a 1, right? But it is weighted, as they're always. Every single Divination card is weighted. So in my opinion, you should not gamble with this because it's actually a very expensive Divination card due to the fact that it could give you a 1-socket Voices or 1 passive Voices, which could be worth, multiple mirrors in certain leagues. All right, a random Watchstones for 8 cards. Most of the unique Watchstones are extremely cheap, so that's just not worth your time. Beano's Kitchen Knife for 6 cards, not worth your time. Garbage. The Emptiness, Val Breach for 6 cards, 6 quality. Unless you really need Val Breach for your own build, no one's really going to pay for this. It's kind of whatever. A Sea of Blue is a 3 card for 13 alts. So unless, you know, alterations are 1-to-1, this is just trash. People are just going to use it for themselves. Now, I believe the Offspring is a new card, but it's really, really good. Rysatha's Coil is very, very sought after, especially in a League Start scenario, due to the fact that it's one of the items that is going to give the most amount of damage to a melee build, on par with something like an Abyssus, really. It gives a ton of damage to melee attack builds, or I think just to attack builds in general. So Rysatha's Coil is very, very strong. This is a card that people will also undervalue early due to the fact that a lot of people can't afford it. We actually made a few of these Rysatha's Coils in the League Starts, me and my duo, and it was actually quite profitable. So the Offspring is definitely a good one. All right, Price of Presence with a Val Temple, T16, 100% Delirium. Now, the problem is that Val Temple is a horrible map. Lots of people don't like it. 100% Delirious is going to make the bosses super hard to deal with. They're already hard to deal with. But, I mean, I don't know. If you really want to, go for it. I don't think you're going to be able to do anything profit-wise with this card. The Mind's Eye is an Astral Projector. Funny, because I was actually talking about Astral Projector just earlier. Being the ring. Let me see if I can show it to you guys. Astral Projector, right? So this ring basically gives you Nova spells cast at a targeted location instead of around you. So it's super, super, super strong because it also applies to mines. So yeah, this one here, I believe this is also a new card. It's a 7-card set. I don't know how rare it is, but I can tell you that Astral Projector in the League Start scenario is both very expensive and very sought after, especially if, you know, skills like Pyroclast or Blazing Salvo and whatnot are meta. So that's one that you could definitely make a lot of currency off of in the right situation. All right, Terrible Secret of Space, level 20 Golem gem, level 21, 23 Golem gem, probably not worth your time. Blessing of Moosh, random item with elaborate enchant. Again, there's like 1,000+ different items. No one cares. Unique items. Double Influence, random unique, again, probably 1,000+, not worth your time. Lacrimal Necrosis is a corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you, corrupted jewel. That's cool. But the problem is, you don't know what you're going to get on the jewel. All you know is that you're going to get corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you. If corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you is extremely expensive in a league for one reason or another, it's something to consider. But corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you is a 1 in 60 when you're valuing regular jewels. So there's basically no way that this card would ever be really worth it, except maybe extremely early, but I've never seen it, so I'm guessing it's new. All right, this is another one of the new ones, Dementophobia. This is 10 Delirium Orbs for 11 cards, but the thing is, this card is super common. I believe it drops from the Conquerors. That's where I've dropped most of mine, and it seems to be like very, very, very common. So for people who are into farming things like Harvest, if it's on the map device, this card is sick because instead of having to buy Delirium Orb one at a time from different players, you can actually buy the set of card, which will give you a full stack of 10 Delirium Orb, and then what you can do is use this 10 stack of Delirium Orb and change it into a stack of different Delirium Orbs with Harvest. And let's say you could change the worst possible Delirium Orbs in the best possible one. Let's just say Armor Delirium Orbs, which are like 10C each, into Skittering, which is Scarabs at like 50 each, and then boom, you just made 500% profit. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. Also, if you're playing in party, right? If you're playing in a party and you constantly have to be buying Delirium Orbs, buying this card on live search might just be a lot of time that you're going to save for your party. So if you're, for party players, I think this card is fantastic. For solo players, of course, it's not as good. And then finally, Ambitious Obsession for a Skittering Delirium Orb. So again, it depends on the price of Skittering Delirium Orbs. They're typically quite expensive, but for 4 cards, the odds of actually turning a profit here is actually not that bad, but it's not going to make you rich, right? Especially because I'm guessing that these are pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen it. I think it's pretty new. But let's just say that Skittering Delirium Orbs are like 50C and this card is 10C. You're technically making 10C every time you are finishing up a Skittering Delirium Orb, which is really, really good. But it really comes down to the price of these different things. So that concludes the second video of going over every single one of the 369 divination cards. Now, I thought the first half was going to be longer, but it turns out that the second had a lot more good divination cards than the first half did. And I'm not sure if there's any logic in terms of how they are placed, like newer ones at last or something, but it does seem like all the newer cards are at the ending, which is probably why the first half was a lot easier, because some of these cards are super old and just outright you can pretty much ignore them nowadays. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Before I go, as always, I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters: Jordan, Fruitfly, Thomas, Neroth, Master, Tim, Nick, Jacob, Flame Scorpion, Reese, Emma, Road to Millions, Alex, Brandon, Don, Joseph, Welcome Back, Pada, Adicus, Scott, Bart, Grimar, Johnny, Ronald, Kevin, Mercury, and Bijan, as well as, of course, anybody else who has supported me in the past or anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys had a good time, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.